And welcome to Weather Geeks. It is my extreme honor to have with us today truly a legend in the field, someone that is inspiring to not only me, but to every aspiring scientist and girl out there in the world today, Dr. Jane Goodall. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
I want to start off, well, I have several questions I want to ask. Unfortunately, we don't have the time I wish we had, but one of the first questions that my daughter Arissa wanted me to ask you is, though you study quite a few different types of species, how did you really kind of narrow in on chimpanzees as your primary focus?
Well, when I was 10 years old, it was when I decided to go to Africa and live with animals and write books about them.
Yes.
We didn't have any money, but eventually I saved up, I got out there, and I met the late Louis Leakey, very
Yes,
famous paleontologist.
absolutely.
He was the one who suggested chimpanzees. I would have studied anything.
Ah, so there really was some mentoring or guidance in that choice.
He wanted somebody to study chimpanzees, and he'd been looking for somebody for 10 years, he
Yes.
tells me.
Yes.
And then he found me.
Well, that's amazing. Now, this show is Weather Geek, so we talk about everything from a weather perspective. So in your time in nature and in your time with the chimps, are there special things that you've observed about how the chimpanzees actually respond to different types of weather or climate?
Absolutely. So in the wet season, and it rains for about 6 months of the year in
Yes.
Gombe National Park,
Yes.
they get a lot of respiratory illnesses. They huddle and hunch in the rain. They're totally miserable.
Oh, is that right?
They have not learned to make a roof over their nest at night, so they just sit up looking miserable. But sometimes at the start of really heavy rain, the adult males and sometimes younger ones will do this charging display, and it's as though they're defying the rain.
Oh,
And
is that correct?
They charge about, they throw rocks, they wave branches, and very impressive rain displays.
So and that was actually something I wanted to get into, or their awareness of these. Does it actually change their behavior in any way? So obviously it does. They're quite aware.
Absolutely.
Now, also related to weather, clearly, as I often talk about, climate is just sort of the statistical properties of the weather. In your time in nature, have you noticed changes that you would attribute to climate change, and what can you offer to our viewers in that regard?
I've noticed a lot.
I bet you have.
I'm traveling 300 days a year around the world.
Yes.
And everywhere I go, whether it's Africa, Europe, North, South America, Asia, people are saying the same sort of thing. This is very weird weather. We never used to have this weather at this time
Some of us
year.
call it weather weirding here in the U.S., and
well,
that's quite
that's
what it is.
What people are saying. And so, the droughts coming from the southern part of Africa,
Yes.
the droughts are just getting so much worse. And then the flooding. UK, the floods there are unbelievable.
Exactly, yeah.
And, birds are nesting earlier and plants are coming out earlier. It's just completely crazy, completely weird.
I'm so glad that you're bringing this natural perspective on change, because often sort of animal and plant phenology is one of the strongest indicators of some of this change, and that's something that the public don't understand. And related to that, as we see perhaps shifts in climate, would this perhaps expand or even contract the habitat range of chimpanzees and other primates? Are there any challenges there?
It'll probably contract because it's affecting the tropical forests. And, as they dry up, the fires get worse.
Yes.
And chimpanzees rely on forests to a large extent.
Now, and can we build on that? It's something that I wanted to ask based on that answer. How do the chimpanzees respond to these fires, whether they be natural lightning-induced fires or perhaps even man-made fires for various reasons? Is that a threat to them, or do they understand that it's just a part of the sort of the natural system?
Well, they are not terrified. They don't flee. They regard it quite calmly. And where they are, there's valleys with thick forests, and the fire doesn't get there. So the chimpanzees aren't actually in danger. They just have to go down into the forest.
Oh, I see.
But actually they and the baboons sometimes look for insects that maybe they like the crunchy taste
Oh,
of,
wow.
cooked
A
insects.
little charbroiled insect there, a little barbecue out there in the forest.
Right.
So one of the questions that I really wanted to ask you is, just in your distinguished career, are there any particular or special stories that stick out in your mind that has a weather or climate angle to it?
One definitely does.
Yeah.
I was in Greenland and I was with some Inuit elders, and we were up by this great ice cliff that goes up to the ice
Yes.
cap. And it was very early spring. It should have been cold. It wasn't cold.
Right.
And the Inuits were saying, when we were children, the ice here never melted, not even in the summer.
Yes.
The water was pouring out, huge icebergs were breaking off, calving they call it. And we were talking there, I was talking with some of the scientists, and they were saying, if, God forbid, but if all the ice melted up here, water levels of the sea would rise 11 feet. I went by chance directly to Panama, and when I was there, I met, again, it was indigenous people.
Yes.
They were moving their people off the offshore islands because at high tide, they were no longer habitable.
Yeah, and that's one of the big concerns, sort of called climate refugees. As places become inundated, they have to find new homes, move away. So it's interesting as you go from polar latitudes to tropical latitudes, the interconnectivity of nature. And that's one of the interesting things that I think many of our kids understand that. Many of the public, and particularly some older generation, don't understand the importance of biodiversity. What would you say about why it's so important to maintain biodiversity in our natural system?
I think it's because, and it's illustrated so perfectly in a forest, everything is interconnected.
Yes.
And, you know, one form of life relies upon another form of life. So even an insignificant little change can have a ripple effect.
That's correct.
And eventually lead to ecosystem collapse.
Now, you know, I spent a good portion of my career at NASA studying the Earth as a system, not studying just weather and climate, but all aspects of the system. What would you say to people who argue that saving animals is not as important as sort of our maintaining our way of life and the things that we need? We're a resource-dependent society. We need electricity. Some people often say, oh, you know, yeah, I like polar bears or I like chimpanzees, but my life's more important. How would you respond to that?
Well, first of all, you know, these animals live in habitats.
That's correct.
And if we take the chimpanzee, they need the forest. What do the forests do? They provide us with so much of these resources you talk about.
Yes.
But the thing is, we're treating these natural resources as though they're infinite, and they're not.
Right.
They will come to an end. And we see places, you know, where forests have gone, and then you get terrible soil erosion, you get terrible flooding.
Yes.
And it's just so obvious we need the forest. We need the animals because they're part of the whole biodiverse system. Yes. Take the chimpanzees and other big primates and birds out of a forest, and then they help to disperse the seeds, so the forest stops growing.
Yes, it's amazing. Now, you were here in the Atlanta, Georgia area receiving the Exemplar Award from the Kaplan Planet Foundation, which is an outstanding award organization trying to protect our natural resources and our environment. Climate is a big part of that, and certainly Weather Geeks viewers and others on the Weather Channel know about that. But there is a variance in opinion on what's happening with climate change, although most that study this topic suggest that it's certainly real and humans are a part of the contribution. What would you say to those that actually are skeptical about human contributions to climate change?
Well, in fact, you know, they usually argue, oh, but it's a cycle, maybe a long cycle.
Yes.
But indeed, weather has cycles.
Sure,
we know there were
does.
ice ages and then they went away.
Sure.
But the scientists have worked out that these changes are so much faster, they're happening so quickly, and that, you know, I just happen to believe the huge body of scientists who've studied for several years and come together with their conclusions, and that human activities is speeding it up. Sure,
it's the rate of change of our viewers that took a calculus class. It's just a derivative, and that certainly gives you indication that human contribution is on top of that obvious natural cycle that scientists are trained to understand as well. That's one of the things that always is interesting to me. And just as we draw to a close, it's just been an honor to have you here. What would you offer as just some hopeful words going forward to view? We have several viewers that watch this show. Weather Channel is quite well received in almost every home in America. What would you offer to the citizens of the United States in terms of hope?
That we have a window of time. I don't know how long it is, but I'm sure we have. We have to, first of all, become aware, and that's growing fast. But being aware isn't enough. We have to roll up our sleeves and do something about the way we live.
Yes.
So we have this youth program, Roots and Shoots, which actually goes along with what Captain Planet is doing.
Yeah, it's an amazing program. I've had the chance to study up on that.
And so all of our young people, you know, they're busy working on their parents and change the way we live. Just for a simple, ordinary person, think about the consequences of the small choices you make each day.
Yes.
I know my reasons for hope, the resilience of nature,
Yes.
nature coming back given a chance,
Yes.
animal species rescued, the human brain, all the amazing technology that will help us live in greater harmony if we use it.
That's correct.
And then in our own individual lives. And finally, the indomitable human spirit.
That is
the people
correct.
who tackle the impossible and won't give up.
Right. Well, you know, here at the Weather Channel, we often talk about that it's amazing out there. That's the slogan. But today it's amazing in here to have you join us. So thank you very much for joining us. Thank you.
Thank you.